Hello, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon for those who may be joining us from Israel. Welcome to this wonderful session that we have of learning and exploration with Tamar Biala and Yael Karenak of the Toratah Project, which we'll hear much more about in a moment, but is a project of regendering the Tanakh of sacred text and seeing how that impacts our understanding of that text. And we're really privileged this morning to learn with them both. Tamar, it's great to welcome you back to BJ, who was with us for learning last year as well. Tamar has taught at various Batei Midrash rabbinical schools and adult education programs in the US and in Israel. And at the Shalom Hartman Institute, she's trained teachers and IDF Army officers and is co-editor of Dear Shuni, the first volume with Nechama Weingart-Mintz, and has edited volume 2 as well. And we also have with us Yael Karenak, who has been a practicing visual artist and jewelry designer working across various media for 30 years. And in her work, she explores the role of language and narrative in forming a worldview. And in 2016, after a decade of Kabbalah studies at the traditional Baal HaSulam, and in response to the stunning void of canonical literature that codifies women's experiences in sacred texts, she began this work, leading to the Toratah Project. So I want to really welcome them, and I think Yael, you're gonna speak first. Is that right?
Yes, I will. Thank you, everyone, being here. Thank you, Dave. I'm so excited. Hey, Harlan. Seeing familiar faces and new faces. So I'm just going to say a few words about Torata, and I'm actually going to I'll do it through a quick view of the website. So in 2016, I had a kind of a spiritual breakdown. The teacher I studied with, they couldn't study with anymore. I heard him say that he doesn't know how to teach women, even though he had many women students, but there is something about that kind of transmission that at some point was just not, it had limitations. And at the same time, I realized that I don't have a book I can go to where I can learn something about a direct relationship between the divine and myself as a woman. So applying techniques from contemporary art, which is my practice, I thought, where would I go? So the first place to go to was Genesis. That's the place I knew. And I started flipping the genders to see what happens if the divine inspiration goes through a mother-daughter lineage. And that was really a eureka moment and a kind of a shocking moment. And I just continued. And 4 years later, I completed the first draft of the Chumash. And shortly after, Tamar joined me and we started doing the whole thing over again in much greater depth. And about a year and a half ago, or maybe almost 2 years, we launched the website, Toratah, with studies, and we started publishing these texts. And this is the website. And we have a growing library. We just added Mordechai scroll. And last week we added Vatikra in Hebrew. We do a once a week lesson, and we're studying Genesis, and once a month we do Haftarah. Tamar writes a blog here, which I really recommend looking at on different aspects and of the narratives as they come up and what they teach us. I create visual midrashim, and we have recordings and songs. So this is really this kind of an experiment towards this new library is really taking root more and more, and it's also taking root within us, and that's really one of the biggest things, is this kind of adjustment to new language. So today we're going to study with you, share with you Mordechai scroll, and Tamar, take it away.
Thank you. So what I want to do now, just for a few minutes, is to go over the Megillat Mordekhai, not Megillat Esther, because Megillat Mordekhai is a different new Megillah. And it's a non-patriarchal text. I guess most of us have never read non-patriarchal text, even if we read a lot of science fiction, as I did, because it's a book that doesn't have in the back mind of the writers any patriarchal understanding, because we wrote it artificially. So this is a fascinating Megillah, or text bichlal, generally. And in the discussion later, we will ask ourselves, is it a feminist text? What kind of text is it? We changed the names of all the heroes in the Megillah, but as opposed to all the rest of the books that we have changed names, and people that study with us knows it, this time most of the names are in Persian and in ancient Persian. So the changes will sound it will sound different because we changed it from a feminine endings to masculine, and we consulted Persian scholars to know how to do it. So the one thing that may confuse us, but we will get used to it, is that we switched between Mordechai and Esther. They have their names, but they are opposite roles. Mordechai is the lad, the beautiful lad that turns into a king, and Esther is the aunt that raised him. So one more thing is that there are no Yehudim and Yehudiyot in Mordechai's scroll. There are Tehudim and Tehudiyot, because in Genesis, the tribe of Yehuda becomes the tribe of Tehudah, which is one of the 12 daughters of Taakov. So the Jews are now called Tehudiyot. And we use the plural feminine. So you will hear a lot of Tehudiyot, even though it means men and women together. We changed not only people. In this book, also city and country and land are in the masculine. We will not talk about it this time. In other occasions, we can talk about this switch, because we did it in all the Bible. Cities are masculine because they have a role in the imagery of the prophets in the Bible. So I'm going to tell you in 3-4 minutes the story of Megillat Mordechai, because we won't read all of it. We will read just 2 chapters and then just few anecdotes. I'll tell it quickly because we have to get used to the names and realize that it's a different story. Of course, we will ask ourselves later in the conversation, what does it mean that women and men change the gender roles, that women massacre, maybe it's a self-defense. We'll talk about these new phenomena soon. So it all begins with Queen Achashveroshni, that throws a banquet and orders the 7 castrated women who serves before her to bring the good-looking King Vashta to show off him to everyone, but he refuses. Her advisors, the wise women, realize the threat, the rebellion that may arise among all the men in the queendom. And they offer to switch Vashta probably off with his head. And a process to find a new man for the queen begins. All the virgin handsome lads are being brought to the fortress Shushan. The meaning of Bira, Shushan HaBira, means fortress. So they are being invited to the house of men under the supervision of Hegi. Hegi is the woman that is in charge of all the men putting the oils and getting ready to the night with the queen. And among these lads, there is Mordechai, the orphan Tehudi, who is being raised by his aunt Esther and being brought by her to the fortress. Of course, he's the one to be chosen by Queen Achashveroshni, and his aunt Esther gains to sit in the gate of the whatever palace or fortress. There she hears two of the queen's castrated women that serve as a threshold guards, Biktani and Tarshi, that plot to lay hand on the queen. And she makes sure that Mordechai will hear about it, tell Hashveroshni. And the little story is written in the Queen's Book of Chronicles. Queen Ahasuerusni later on will elevate Hamani, her favorite advisor. But Hamani is terribly upset with Esther, the aunt that sits in the gate because it doesn't bow before her. And she convinces Queen Ahasuerusni to kill all the Tehudiot, arguing that it will pay off financially. They set the date using a pur, a lot, either fate or the hand of goddess, however you read it. The women couriers rush to all the queendom's provinces to spread the word, and the Tehudiot panic. Esther puts on sackcloth and ashes and cries. Mordechai, the king, hears about it, sends to find out why is Esther so upset, and she sends him back that he has to plea for the queen to beg to save all the Tehudiot. Mordechai is afraid because he wasn't invited to the queen for more than 30 days, and it's very dangerous. You are not allowed to come to attend the queen without the invitation. He wants everyone to fast for him, with him, something that could have become Tanit Mordechai. And he meets the queen, who's happy with him. She lets him touch the, we'll see. And he invites her and Hamani, only two of them, to a banquet he will throw today. They're coming, and Hamani leaves the banquet in a high, only she gets upset again when she sees that Esther still doesn't bow. She comes home to her man Zarsha and her friends and complains. They offer her to prepare a stake 50 cubits high and to convince the queen to hang Esther on it. Hamani can't wait. She's going already towards the palace, and that night the queen's sleep wanders. Heat flashes, maybe? She orders to read from the Book of Chronicles, finds out that Esther was never rewarded for saving her life in the plot of Biktani and Tarshi. And exactly then she hears that Hamani is around, and she consults her how to honor a woman she may want to reward. Hamani goes to town with her fantasies. She's sure it's her, but Nebuch, she's ordered to do all the cool things to Esther. This all is being done, and Hamani gets back home depressed and humiliated, and her man Zarsha tells her that if Esther is from the fruit of the womb of the Tehudiot, she's doomed. The next day, in the second banquet, Mordechai finally comes out as Tehudi and pleads for his people. Queen Ahasuerusni realizes what had happened. She leaves the room to get some fresh air, and when she's back, she finds Hamani falling on Mordechai's bed. Hamani is hanged on the stake which she prepared to Esther, and Queen Ahasuerusni gives Mordechai, the king, Hamani's house, and she gives Esther Hamani's ring, her authorities. Mordechai, the young king, begs for the Tehudiot once again, and the queen allows the Tehudiot to protect themselves and fight back. The women couriers ran to all provinces with a new word, and the Tehudiot had light and delight, happiness and honor. On the 13th day of Adar, the Tehudiot struck their enemies. At the fortress Shushan, the Tehudiot killed and annihilated a total of 500 women and the 10 daughters of Hamani. Mordechai asks the queen permission to keep fighting in Shushan for another day and is given the permission. After another successful day of self-protection, Esther writes letters to the Tehudiot all over the queendom to turn this into an annual festive holiday, and they take it upon themselves. So let's hear 2 first chapters of the scroll. Then we'll have a discussion, and then we'll let you see a few snapshots. Then maybe we can get into even a deeper conversation.
So Tirza will lane for us.
I'll just say that, you know, every person has their journey with Torata, and I have the Toratah in mind, journeying into Torata. So join me for the ride, including if I'm straddling both worlds. ויהי בימי אחשוורושני, המולכת מהודנה ועד כוש 27 מדינה, בימים ההם כשבט המלכה אחשוורושני, על כיסא מלכותה אשר בשושן הבירה. בשנת 3 למולכה עשתה משתה לכל שרותיה ועבדותיה, חיל פרסה ומידי, הפרטמות ושרות המדינות לפניה, בהרותה את עושר כבוד מלכותה, ואת יקר תפארת גדולתה, ימים רבים 80 ומעט יום, ובמלאת הימים האלה עשתה המלכה לכל העם הנמצאות בשושן הבירה, למגדולה ועד קטנה, משתה 7 ימים בחצר גינת ביתן המלכה, חור כרפס ותכלת, אחוז בחבלי בוץ וארגמן, על גלילי כסף ועמודי 6, מיטות זהב וכסף, על רצפת בהת ושש, ודר וסוחרת, והשקות בכלי זהב, וכלים מכלים שונים, ואין מלכות רב כיד המלכה, והשתייה חדת אין אונס, כי כן יצדה המלכה על כל רבת ביתה, לעשות כרצון אישה ואישה. גם פשטה המלך עשה משתי אנשים בית המלכות, אשר למלכה אחשוורושני, ביום השביעי כטוב לב המלכה ביין, אמרה למהומני, ביסתי חרבוני, בקתי ובגתי, צטרי וחרקסי, 7 הסריסות המשרתות את פני המלכה אחשוורושני, להביא את ושתה המלך לפני המלכה בכתר מלכות, להראות המין והשרות את יופיו, כי טוב מראה הוא, וימאן המלך ושתה, לבוא בדבר המלכה אשר ביד הסריסות, ותקצוף המלכה מאוד, וחמתה ברבה. ותאמר המלכה לחכמות יודעות העתים, כי כן דבר המלכה לפני כל יודעות דת ודין, והקרובה אליה קרשני שטרי אדמתי תרשיש, מרסי מרסני ממוכני 7 שרות פרסה ומידי, רואות פני המלכה היושבות ראשונה במלכות, כדת מה לעשות במלך ושתה, אשר לא עשה את מאמר המלכה אחשוורושני ביד הסריסות. ותאמר ממוכני לפני המלכה והשרות, לא על המלכה לבדה, אבל ושתה המלך כי על כל השרות ועל כל העמים אשר בכל מדינות המלכה אחשוורושני, כי יצא דבר המלכה על כל האנשים, להבזות בעלותיהם ביניהם, באומרם, המלכה אחשוורושני אמרה להביא את ושתה המלך לפניה ולובה, והיום הזה יאמרו שרי פרסה ומדי, אשר שמעו את דבר המלך לכל שרות המלכה, וכדאי ביזיון וקצף, אם על המלכה טוב יצא דבר מלכות מלפניה, ויכתב בדתי פרסה ומדי ולא יעבור, אשר לא יעבור ושתה לפני המלכה אחשוורושני, ומלכותו תיתן המלכה לרעו הטוב ממנו, ונשמע פתגם המלכה אשר תעשה בכל מלכותה, כי רבה היא בכל האנשים, יתנו יקר לבעלותיהם, למגדולה ועד קטנה, ויטב הדבר בעיני המלכה והשרות, ותעש המלכה כי דבר ממוכני, ותשלח ספרים אל כל מדינות המלכה, אל מדינה ומדינה ככתבה, ואל עם ועם כלשונה, להיות כל אישה שוררת בביתה, ומדברת כלשון עמה.
Thank you.
אחר הדברים האלה.
תרצה, עכשיו נקרא בעברית, באנגלית. Lorraine will read the English. Thank you, תרצה.
Mordechai 1, right?
2.
2. Yeah. Close.
I'm just going to put the link again.
Yeah.
For everyone.
After these things, when the anger of Queen Ahasuerus subsided, she remembered Vashta and what he had done and what had been decreed against him. The queen's girls, her servants, said, "Let good-looking virgin lads be sought out for the queen." And the queen appointed women clerks in all provinces of her queendom to assemble every good-looking virgin lad at the fortress Shushan into the house of men under the supervision of Hegai, the queen's castrated woman, guardian of the men, and let them be provided with their bombs. And the lad who will be pleasing in the eyes of the queen will rule instead of Vashta. The proposal pleased the eyes of the queen, and she did so. A Tehudiah who was in the fortress Shushan by the name of Esther, daughter of Tair, daughter of Shemit, daughter of Kishta, a Yemenite woman, who had been exiled from Terushalama with the exiled people who were exiled with Techonta, queen of the Tehudah, who had been driven into exile by Nebuchadnezzar, queen of Bavla. And she became a guardian to Hadass, who is Mordechai, her aunt's son, for he had neither mother nor father. The lad was handsome and good-looking, and when his mother and father died, Esther had taken him as her son. And when the queen's decree and law were heard, and when many lads were assembled in the fortress Shushan under the supervision of Hegai, Mordechai was taken into the queen's palace under the supervision of Hegai, guardian of the men. And the lad pleased her eyes and won his favor before her, and she hastened with his balms and his meals to bring to him, as well as with the 7 lads who were fit to give him from the queen's house. And she treated him and his lads favorably in the men's house. Mordechai did not reveal his people and his kin, for Esther had directed him not to reveal it. And every single day, Esther would go walking in front of the court of the house of men, to know about the well-being of Mordechai and what was done to him. And when each lad's turn arrived to go to Queen Ahasuerus at the end of the men's custom of 12 months, for this is the conclusion of cosmetic course for men spent on beautifying them, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and men's balms. And in this fashion, the lad would come to the queen. Whatever he asked for would be given to him, to bring with him from the house of men to the queen's house. In the evening he would arrive, and in the morning he would return to the second house of men under the supervision of Shashgazi, the queen's castrated woman, guardian of the male concubines. He would not go again to the queen unless the queen wanted him and would be summoned by name. When the turn came for Mordechai, son of Yael, Esther's aunt, who had adopted him as her own son, to come to the queen, he did not ask for anything except for what Hegi, the queen's castrated women, guardian of the men, would say. And Mordechai won the admiration of all the women who saw him. And Mordechai was taken to Queen Ahasuerus to her royal house in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of her reign. And the queen loved Mordechai more than all the other men, and he won her grace and favor more than all the virgins. And she set a royal crown on his head and made him king instead of Vashti. And the queen gave a great banquet for all her ministers and courtiers, the banquet of Mordechai. She proclaimed a remission of taxes for the provinces and distributed gifts as befits a queen. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Esther sat in the queen's gate. But Mordechai still did not reveal his kin or his people, as Esther had instructed him. And Mordechai followed Esther's command as he had done when he was under her guardianship. In those days, when Esther was sitting in the queen's gate, Bigtani and Tarshi, two of the queen's castrated women of the threshold guards, became furious and sought to lay hands on Queen Ahasuerus. And Esther learned of it and told it to King Mordechai. And Mordechai told the queen in Esther's name. And the matter was searched out and found to be so. And the two were hung on a tree. And it was written in the book of Chronicles before the queen.
Thank you. Thank you, Lorraine.
Sure.
Okay.
So we were thinking of opening the conversation with few questions, but of course you can relate to whatever you want from the text we were just reading. Questions can be, how does it feel to read it this way? Is it a feminist text? Can we turn this book to a holy book? What is it? What are the pros and cons of having such a book in our Jewish bookshelf? Let's begin.
So we just ask that you raise your hand in the so we can. It's easy for us to call on you. Martha and Judith. Hi.
Hi, it's great to see you again. This is really,
Absolutely.
I mean, this is a complicated text in the best of circumstances, and this, of course, makes it even more. But one of the things that struck us as I never noticed, I have to say, I never noticed this before, but verse 8 in chapter 1, which I saw, you also flipped what happens because the Hebrew, or the original, I shouldn't say the Hebrew, the original is the rule for the drinking was no restrictions. And you, in Torata, it's no coercion, which I thought, I mean, that also changes things around a lot. And I was just wondering, it's not typical of what you've done, because it's not just about the gender, but it's the frame somehow. If you have anything to say about that.
Sure. Nothing is accidental in the translation. So the translation into English, translation is interpretation. So we were flexible towards the directions that we needed. The word is en ones, not a man who's honest, who's forcing, but an honest. There is no coercion. So we kept this sense. The way in Bereshit, in the description, when the goddess speaks to the directs the Zohra and Nekev, the first human beings, and she orders them to do anything, to run the world and not to eat animals. So one of the words in Hebrew is that she's telling them, lirdot, redu bidgat hayam. It was understood all the years as control the fish. But we took a different meaning of the word redu, which is redia, means also to harvest. Lirdot dvash, to harvest honey, is a Hebrew expression. So we use that word in English to harvest the fish. So it's a different relationship to nature. So when we could have used other meanings in specific verbs or words in Hebrew, every word in Hebrew can explode to few meanings. So we shifted it. But the main thing was really the switch of people. But after a few rounds, we changed cities and land is male and not female. We had more, all the animals we changed, and we've noticed that animals are heroes and they have meanings.
Dova? You want, we
There I
can.
go. I'm unmuted. First of all, thank you. I mean, I think this is brilliant and thought-provoking and meaningful just to hear it, even just today in class. What struck me most was the idea, the concept, and the how jarring it was for me to see the castrated females, and how not jarring it was for me for many years to see the castrated males, right? And I wondered about whether there was a discussion or thought to not castrating the females.
So it's very interesting when we meet situations like that don't necessarily translate directly into what we know. So sometimes we just leave it as it is, and we learn that when we leave things that are awkward in the text, they open the conversation actually much better. What does it mean or doesn't mean? It could be. I think there's more. We need to really pry into that even more in a deeper sense. I mean, one thing that is coming up for us in 2 or 3 weeks, in the study of Genesis, the issue of circumcision. It's going to be an enormous topic because, I mean, what does it mean here? And it actually, what does Torata mean in general, into how, it sends us into the big frameworks. And I think the castrated women question also does that, because now we're dealing with the body. When it comes to the actual physical body, that's when the questions become a lot more potent and a lot more critical. And since this is really first we're doing all this, there is no we don't have Torah Shebe'al Peh yet. We're just in the process. Your question is actually Torah Shebe'al Peh. It's the beginning of Midrash, but it needs to be written. So these are the kind of things. I don't have a direct question for you, but I'm glad you brought it up, because one of the things that Torata does is really unsettle habitual thinking. So all the things we haven't noticed, even in Torah, suddenly we read the text differently. So even then we go back to Torah, his Torah, we start to read that differently too. And then we get this kind of reciprocal reading and relationship. So I don't have a direct answer for you for that particular question, but yes, it's a question. It's a really good one.
Thank you.
Do you have to add to this?
I just want to add, I'll just add that what we've noticed is that Torata challenges feminists, not less that it challenges people that love patriarchy. Because as a person that grew up in feminist schools, Torata doesn't offer feminist ethics or feminist psychology or theology or whatever I learned. It talks about being human and what do you do when you have powers, and I had to rethink about myself as a woman working with Torata and rethinking about all the assumptions that I believed in all my heart in the women's studies that I did. So it's really a hard work.
Marcy?
Thank you. First of all, just thank you, Yael and Tamar, for your work. It's mind-blowing, I think, to all of us. This is really following up on exactly what you were just talking about how it makes you think differently, because I was thinking about all the women who are angry here. And in this reading in Torata, it felt a little bit like Mean Girls, right? And pettiness. And that made me think about, how do we talk about male anger and how do we talk about female anger, and what feels legitimate and what feels not so legitimate. And so I was playing with that idea, and I wonder what you thought about that, actually.
I personally really like that. And it opens in a much wider way in all the books, because the range of behavior that is now associated with women is very wide. I mean, think about characters like Moshe, who carries her people, out of slavery, and everything that has to do with Moshe and going and bringing down the law and everything. These are really huge characters that now we can identify with through their form, becoming through as women, and of course the relationship with the goddess Tehovah Elohim, which is also another layer of complexity and wealth and richness. What is that influence like? How does it manifest when it is associated with a woman's body? So what it does, it normalizes a much wider range of behaviors and presents them as normal. We don't have that in Torah so much. It's so much more limited. Tamar?
Yeah, I mean, to women's anger, for me, it goes together with things that we were reading in Toratah, women raping, women are doing incest. It's all women. They are being very active and they all have all the power. And it's very hard to talk about it because it does happen around us too. And we hide it, we have excuses, we deny it. I just can send you to, in the blog, in the website, there is one post that I dedicated to rape and incest. And there I'm dealing with this dark sides in us that are flourishing in Torata.
Naomi?
Hi. Well, I've been to some of your sessions, as you know. I think what's interesting about this particular reading is that since there's also a lot of comedy in here, so some of the comedy changes a little bit. For instance, when it says lo ba, instead lo ba'a, so you already have the whole idea of what does it mean for a man not to come, right? Which where with Vashti, it would be, it would be lost. But here you have a new sense of humor here. And also, because of a lot of the comparisons that you have with Esther and Yosef, now, who is a male, right? Yosef is a male. Now that Esther becomes Mordechai, and Mordechai now is Esther in Toratah. So you have an immediate association with the Vayima'en, which you have with Yosef. I don't know what you're doing with when she becomes Tosefa. I don't know what you do with that, but with the Yima'en there. But and also the Yifat Torah, Yifat Mareh. So you have an immediate association, this time male on male. But since you've changed Joseph into a woman, so you don't have it. But for those of us who haven't read haven't read the Joseph story and still have Joseph as a male in mind, you still, so you have new opportunities here, I think, for some of the jokes. And Marcy, I don't think it's Mean Girls, but okay, but that's, I thank you for that. I hadn't thought of that.
Yael taught me when I panicked several times and I was crying because I thought I'm losing Miriam, I'm losing the great woman of Shunem. So she promised me that the Tanakh, the Bible, the traditional Bible is there and it doesn't go anywhere and we can play with both of them. So Naomi, if you want to play, having in your version, in the next version of the Bible, having a male Yosef and female this and that, you can play with them. You can have those that will establish the Jewish people, the Tehudiot, can be Em Rama, which is the female, the feminine Abraham, Em Rama, and Sarah. You can have that kind of new beginning of the Jewish people. So we can, there is plenty now playing with both books.
Yael, you're muted.
Yeah, that's better. That's better. Sorry. We did several experiments like that, bringing both sides together and crossing over the characters to see what kind of stories will emerge. And when I said that to Tamar, I mean, even if we wanted, let's say we wanted to see Toratah, it's not even possible. Even in our minds, it's so deeply established. So you have to raise a generation with just Toratah for them to have to really see that, what happens, in the perception, to really understand that. But I don't know when that's going to happen. I mean, it could happen maybe next year, but I don't know. Yeah, it's a really interesting and rich relationship. Another thing that is interesting, when you bring those two together, they start to at the same time cancel each other and reaffirm each other. And this is a really interesting, working with oppositions as a tool for commentary is actually a really interesting process of consciousness. And I hope we'll see, more of that in the future. But for this to happen, we really need to establish in ourselves the female-centered language. It's a new language. And build an identification, a direct identification with the divine in likeness after image, not as a secondary, not as a third wheel to the relationship, but as the main relationship. And then see the men or the other as the helpmate, identify those relationships within us, then we build a new construction. What is that construction? It's kind of a spiritual, psychological construction through which we see the world. It takes some time, but the key is immersion. It's just exposure to language starts to build that in us. That's why we love language so much. So it does that. So thank you, Naomi. Tova, can we see you?
Hi. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry. I apologize because I have been doing so much during the pandemic. I spend this listening and cooking at the same time, so I don't have my video on. I don't know what's more embarrassingly feminine than doing that. I'm seeing some nods. Good. So I don't feel very judged. Thank you for that. I know Tamar, and I want to say hello and much love from Massachusetts. We miss you here. I really enjoyed this, so thank you. I wanted to ask something that felt kind of painful for me, which I would love to know what you think about. The experience of listening to the abuse and violence like attributed to women. And I guess like something, in many ways, the Torah is a very violent book, and Tanakh is very full of a lot of violence. And sometimes I comfort myself thinking it wouldn't be this way if women were in charge, right? Like I can't imagine a world in which we have a woman keep a harem full of young boys to torture. And I wanted to ask you, like, how do you feel? I mean, I understand that there's a lot of rhetorical force in this effort. So I wanted to ask, like, I don't know, does it feel painful to a reader, to a writer of this text? Does it feel good? I'd love to kind of hear about your thought process of the people involved in this project. I can't imagine it was easy.
No, especially going through Joshua. It's really horrible. So then I took refuge in Tehilot, in Psalms, and then there was no refuge there either. So I ended up in Song and Songs for refuge. But at least for me, in the spiritual process, there's what's called hakarat hara, recognizing the dark side in us. And the growth happens through that. And one of the things I think it has to do a lot with being psychologically on a kind of defense in our society in large. It's very hard to get to that place of or having the agency to recognize our dark side. But it seems to me absolutely essential if we want to address violence happening in the world. We need to also know our violence and how it manifests. And when Tamar brought that up, it was very difficult. I went online and, sent her a whole list of links of, incest perpetrated by women and violence perpetrated by women. And, we have, what was the name of the prison in Iraq where women were perpetrating violence, We know that also from, happening in Israel with women in the army. So, we see power corrupt women too. And I think this, for me at least, this is part of the much, much bigger question is how can we move out of that state of aggression in the world? Is this a tool for us to learn that if we learn our aggression that we usually associate with men and we really kind of don't want to deal with? So this is how I think about it. It's uncomfortable, but it becomes contextualized in the larger story. So it's not violence out of context. It's always within the context of a story. And the stories move and they have transformations in them. So hopefully over time we are able to build a thought framework that will allow this to be not a place that blocks us, but a place that can offer a new way of thinking about this and hopefully action. I hope that helps a little bit, but yeah, it's not easy. Tamar, do you want to say something about that part? Where's Tamar? Tamar.
No.
Okay. All right. Harlan and then Meg.
Two things. One, what is a castrated woman? And two, this may seem heretical. What if all the characters were hermaphrodites? Or put another way, what if they were all trans and fluid? And actually that is not out of line with what Yael was just suggesting about having both a good side and a dark side. I mean, that's a fluid thing in all of us. So let me stop there.
So the Hebrew, we don't have language for presenting text in this way that is completely fluid. It's so deeply binary. But in English, I actually did a little experiment very recently and took the story of the Akedah and completely, let me show it to you because I think this would be easier to see what happens when the text in English is, okay, you see it now. So what I did is I translated the names into their meanings. So Abraham, high father, or Em Rama, high mother, became high parent. And Tosef, Yosef, or Tosef, they will laugh, became, they translate into their name.
Titzchak and
Sorry. Yeah, Titzchak. So it sounds like this. The high parent took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on they will laugh, their child. And they took the fire and the knife in their hand, and the two of them went together. The name of the goddess, Elohim, I translate into these are, Eluhem, these are, and Tehovah, future present. So, and they came to the place of which these are had told them, and the high parent built the altar and laid the wood in order and bound they will laugh their child and laid them on the altar upon the wood. So now the actual meaning of the name is playing in a much more dynamic way into the story. So for me, actually, after I did that, and the reason this came up is because it happens often in our conversation, and we introduce Torata, the question of gender non-binary text. So for me, actually, I ended up feeling it was actually very liberating for me too, because now it takes it out of a particular body and focuses the story on the dynamics, on the relationship of those in those situations. So there's definitely something very rich there. But I don't think we can get there without getting through Torata, because Torata is really the other bookend. So we need to know where this ends. Otherwise, we get extension of the known, which is Torato. So what we're opening by doing Torata is we're making that prism really much more available, I hope. A prism of looking at the story, looking at the situations from multiple directions. Yeah, and without having, necessarily, singular answers. Singular answers don't always help us in these situations. The collective conversation does, I find, more often. Tamar, would you like to add anything? Okay, thank you, Harlan. Meg?
Thank you. The conversation is fascinating, and I just wanted to add two things about what you said about how it would take a whole generation, how things change. And I'm thinking about just the feminist movement, and particularly in the United States, where I grew up, very much part of the feminist consciousness of the second wave of the 1970s. And last night, I rewatched something I hadn't seen since the 80s, the movie with Jane Fonda, Lily Tomlin, and Dolly Parton called 9 to 5. And probably, the younger generation doesn't know that movie and would just be shocked, to see people picking up telephones. It's all about secretaries kind of revolting against their bigoted, sexist boss, and would find these things like crazy because we're so past that today. And they were talking also, we watched something later about just the conversation among those three women who are now all in their early 80s, talking about they'd love to do a remake because The Office is so different, but still dealing with these issues. And it was related also to what you're talking about, violence, because in that film 9 to 5, they showed each woman's fantasy of what they wanted to do to their boss. And they said when they ran the movie, like among audiences of secretaries, first they had like consciousness raising groups with secretaries, asking them about their fantasies of what they wanted to do. And they showed, these really violent things, being a sharpshooter, being the Annie Oakley, being the hired assassin, and stringing the boss up so he's hanging from the ceiling. And, it's just, very interesting. I think it's sometimes looking at an old movie like that, you can really see, I just was connected to what you were saying about generations, how this younger generation of women would never believe that, what was going on then and how people talked and how women were spoken to in the office. And so it will take a generation of people really hearing and getting used to what is still so foreign. What one of the first readers said, that we're still so stuck with Toratah in our mind to really hear it's said this way. But anyway, it's a fun exercise to look at, to see where we've been since the 80s and look at a movie like that.
Thank you, Meg. Tamima?
Yes, first of all, I want to say thank you, Tamar and Yael, for doing this work. It is not easy work. I thought I would find some relief in Megillat Mordekhai. There's not a lot of relief at all. I have to say that it's still a story that celebrates the person who's willing to sort of have a lifetime of rape, of a marriage, of a union that's not by their choice. And the person who refuses to be violated, they're killed. So it's still a really difficult story in that sense. It's a very gendered story because the story is very gendered in the way that the sexual violence plays out in so many respects. I appreciate that, someone who's worked a lot in the grassroots on sexual violence in the Jewish community, I appreciate that there is a space to look at how women would be if they were the violators. I read it with a lot of caution because it's still in the work of working on sexual violation, it's still a 90-10 kind of equation. And so I read it with a lot of caution in terms of perpetrators. And it is true that it is hard for us to imagine what the world would be like if women had all the power. Would they be equally just as violent as men? Because it's not sexual, it's about power. But that's a fantasy altogether. What would the world be like if women had all the power? So it does, reading this Megillah does require us to go into headspaces that are complicated and difficult. And I still have a hard time that the text that we celebrate around is a text that's full of sexual violence. It's still a story that's filled with sexual violence, regardless of who the victims are at the end or the survivors are. So it's still a really difficult. I love Purim. I grew up with Purim. It's still, now as an adult, it remains a really difficult holiday to celebrate a text like this. And I really commend you for, going through this, because it's a lot to go through emotionally as you put it together. So thank you.
Thank you, Tamima. One of the exercises that Tamar and I did was, Tamar, do you want to talk about that? But the little exercise you did when the text was really unbearable.
Ken, I'll mention it, but then I would like, after Sue will speak, maybe we'll show the little tiny pieces that we added. There was one moment when we're going over the mitzvah of Ben Sorer Umore, a child that is eating a lot of meat and drinking a lot of wine and disobey his parents in Toratah. The parents are supposed to bring him to the elderly in the gate of the town, and he's being punished officially to be stoned, and the parents are the first to stone him. So when we switched it sounded just as horrible, actually even more horrible, because for me, a teenage that was eating like that and drinking, of course, suffered from an eating disorder. And I know a bulimic girl personally, very intimately, and I panicked reading the other direction. So I told Yael, I can't. I was crying. I didn't know what to do with myself. And then she said, so this is the time to write a third version of the Bible and write how would you deal with such circumstances. I didn't want to do it, and she forced me, and I did it. And it was the first time after many occasions that we had this crisis that I was willing to write finally a third draft, and it was such a relief afterwards. So much a cry of relief, not of bitterness. Maybe I will add that if we're talking about movies from the 80s, so I watched with my daughter last week, Yento. When I first saw it many years ago, I was, I went to town with identification, even though I grew up in Be'er Sheva, not in, Eastern Europe, and yet I identified with everything. And now that I read it after that I watched it, I don't know, 35 years later, I was crying again because I felt new bitterness. So I did study Torah for, I don't know, 40 years. And disappointment of what I found, there was a struggle to study it. And when I studied Talmud for many years, realizing that that is what's written there, it was such heartbreaking problem. So I don't know how Torata will solve the problem. I hope it will add, it's another strategy of being able to scream and to shake a little bit the catastrophe.
Another thing that I think, Torata is opening a door. It's not a sealed book like the way. So the way we think about Torah, his Torah, the traditional Torah, is not the same way we think about Torata, which is just the door just opened. We're just peeking through and like, oh, what do we have here? This is where we're from. So do we, is new language coming into it? Do we take passages and do what Tamar we did, and we build a new story and say, okay, what is that story and how does that work and what does that build in us? Because these narratives are consciousness building narratives. They build a worldview in us, and then through that we negotiate reality, right? So what needs to be in that, Torata 2.0? What we don't know yet, but because we have to get through this is just the first step. But it opens the door for a potential for a new library. And we, all of us, are the ones to write it. We need to write it. For that, we need to have the agency. And 1.0, Torata 1.0 gives us this agency, or at least shows us how Toratah agency works. Do we want a different kind of agency? Maybe. But once you feel it, you feel that agency, and it says, oh, I can interpret. I can write. Not only I can, I have to. I am writing. To get past the what if. We don't have time anymore for what ifs. So what is the theology? Where does it grow? How do you really create reciprocal relationship in our theology that is not based on the immediate, out of the box subjugation of women? That's what's written in Toratah right away, right in the first chapter. So what do? We can't throw it out because it's in us. We turn it over, we cross them over, we go, we take it to, in a new direction. I mean, all this is possible. All these variations are now, the door is open. I did the thing, I broke the lock, the ceiling did not fall on my head. I did look up. It did not. And the more we live in it, the more I live in it, one of the things that is really hard to acknowledge is how deep of a spell Toratah has on us as a society at large, past the Jewish world. So it's a big task, but you're all, we are all the chachamot, the Chazal of now, chachmotenu, our wise women of the future, for the future. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that. So no, don't, what I'm saying, we don't have to panic. We get through it, kind of chill into it, not everything has to trigger. I mean, we get used to it, so it doesn't trigger so much anymore. And then we can start really look and pry in and ask yourself, what's the next? What's the other sentence that would go in here? Sue, and then we'll go through the, a few more passages. Sue, hi.
Such deep appreciation for this continually evolving work. And I remember one study session where one of you said you are walking in the world differently. I think both of you, Yael and Tamar. And I think this is yet another text that helps us to imagine walking in the world differently. And really building on what both Tamima and Martha and Judith asked, I'm wondering about the very end, which we didn't read, but when you spoke about self-protection and self-defense at the part of the story that won't be read when I take my grandchildren on Wednesday night, about the massacre. And it just, of course, it's shimmering in its contemporaneous, in what's going on in the world now. But also we are all people who struggle with our love for Medinat Israel, Eretz Israel. So I wondered if you could talk a little more about that the ending of the text.
Let's read some of it. Chapter 9, Tamar, you want? I think so. I think it's chapter 9. So let's see. Here we go. Sue, would you like to read that? We can't hear you.
Yes. Verse 11, on that day, the number of those killed in the fortress Shushan was reported before the queen. And the queen said to King Mordechai, in the fortress Shushan, the Tehudiot have killed and annihilated a total of 500 women and the 10 daughters of Hamani. What then must they have done? In the provinces of the queen, what is your wish now? It shall be granted to you. And what else is your request? It shall be fulfilled. And Mordecai said, if it please your majesty, let the Tehudiot in Shushan be permitted to follow the law tomorrow, also as they did today, and let Hamani's 10 daughters be hung on the stake.
Mm-hmm.
Should I keep going, or that's enough for now?
This is enough for now.
Okay.
Well, take it in. Tamar, do you have anything to say about it? I can tell you that I never growing up, I never knew about the massacre. And I was really, really shocked when we started working on that. That was like, whoa, okay. How did that get there? So let's go, because we only have a few more minutes. I want to say a few words just before we go. We'll read the last few minutes. This is what we're doing. We are doing it, we're able to do it because we're supported by donations. And also when you enter the library, it invites you to register. That helps us be in touch, but also it protects a little bit. So the access is not entirely random. Because for some people this is deeply sacrilege. And for some people it's an opening, a door, and a relief. So I just wanted to mention that. And also wanted to thank Dave, with Vestamarnas, like Dave and BJ in general, for having us and the opportunity to meet the community as well. So let's read a couple more just to kind of, so we have a little more taste for that. Harlan, would you like to read the passages that I highlighted? Can't hear you. You need to unmute.
And on the third day, Mordecai put on royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the queen's palace, facing the queen's house. And the queen was sitting on her royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. And as soon as the queen saw King Mordecai standing in the court, he won her favor. And the queen extended to Mordecai the golden scepter which she had in her hand, And Mordecai approached and touched the head of the scepter.
Thank you, Harlan. Martha or Judith, would you like to read?
And Hamani took the attire and the mare and dressed Esther and paraded her through the city square. And she proclaimed before her, "This is what is done for the woman whom the queen desires to honor." And Esther returned to the queen's gate, and Hamani hurried home in mourning and her head covered. And Hamani told Zorsha, her man, and all her close friends everything that had befallen her. Her advisors and Zorsha, her man, said to her, "If from the fruit of the womb of the Tehudiot is Esther, whom you have begun falling before, you will not overcome her. For you will fall before her."
Thank you. Tamima, would you like to read?
In Hebrew or English?
In English, highlighted.
And the queen rose up in her fury from the wine banquet to the pavilion garden, and Hamani stood to plead for her life from King Mordechai, for she saw that the queen had doomed her. And the queen returned from the pavilion garden to the wine banquet house, as Hamani was falling on the bed on which Mordechai was. And the queen said, "To also subdue the king with me in the house?" No sooner did these words leave the queen's mouth than Hamani's face was covered.
And our last passage, Sarah Levine, would you like to read? Just unmute. Unmute.
Okay. All right. For Esther, the Tehudiah was second to Queen Ahasuerus and with the rest of the Tehudot, and popular with most of her sisters. She sought the good of her people and spoke peace for all her fruit of the womb.
Thank you. So,
I like that.
Oh, good. It's nice to read, to end the story with fruit of the womb. Thank you. All right. So I think our time is up. Tamar, closing remarks?
Yes, we didn't talk about women's sexual desire, the inflation of, we don't have this maybe I don't have this I don't know, we don't describe women this intense, whatever. So I invite you to read the new book that we just put on our website, Vatikra, that deals with sexuality. And there, the sexuality in men and women are opposites. Women are causing sex, and their body is causing tum'ah, tahara. It has a different status than it used to be before, and the bleeding of women loses its importance, and it moves to men. If men have bleeding from their penis, they have all the problems of nida. It's a fascinating new book. And next week on Sunday, we're celebrating Sefer Vatikra. We're going to read the best parts of the book in our shiur, in our class, so everybody's invited. And new self-understanding means also new self-understanding of the body. So this is a challenge.
So we do have it only in Hebrew still. What's happening this year is we're uploading the whole Chumash in Hebrew. As we study Genesis, we keep translating into English. And once we put the full Chumash, then we will put all our effort behind the English translation. So we can, to speed that up as much as we can. But for the lesson, for next week, we will translate the passages that we're going to highlight. So no worries there. You don't need to know Hebrew. All right. Dave?
Great. Yeah, El Tamar, thank you so much for really this mind-opening and heart-opening learning today. It's